For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to Strat News Global and welcome to The Gist, our signature show on foreign affairs, security, technology and a lot else. The other day, Communications Minister Vaishnavi made a telephone call using Indigenous 4G technology. That's what the report said. It was made through the BSNL network. So to understand exactly the import of this, I have with me Professor Bhaskar Ramamurthi, Director IIT Madras, who is involved in the 4G, 5G transition. So welcome, glad to have you.
Good to be on your show. Thank you very much.
Now, 4G is over a decade old. So, what do we are we behind in terms of the technology? Would you explain what this is all about?
Okay. So, when you say we, I suppose what you mean is indigenous technology developers. So, 5G technology is already is being developed in India. Has already been announced by some players. You might have seen the announcement that Jio is planning to deploy indigenous 5G technology. That's what their announcement says. And there is also the government-funded 5G indigenous testbed that has been developed by 8 institutes, in which I'm the national coordinator and we are a major player. We are almost ready. End of this month, we'll be ready with the system. So that way we are not behind. However, it turns out that BSNL has not yet deployed 4G in their network. I don't want to take your time to go through the history of what happened with BSNL, but 4G started being deployed in India around 2016, as you may recall, even by the other operators. And somehow in that period, BSNL was not able to roll out 4G. So BSNL is still, they have a few pockets of 4G, but by and large, they are still a 2G, 3G network. And they have they need to roll out 4G, and probably they'll end up rolling out 5G within a year or so in parallel. 4G and 5G anyway go hand in hand. They are not they are sort of compatible technologies. So I don't see it as a big problem. But yes, I think 4G is a very important stepping stone for indigenous technology providers to start deploying 5G after that. So in that sense, it's not late. But yes, BSNL is late in rolling out 4G. There's no doubt about it.
So this indigenous 4G, where is it coming from?
Yeah, so one of the reasons you might ask, why is it that indigenous technology has not been deployed in Indian networks till now? For one thing, till about, I would say, I don't know the exact number of years, but at least 5-6 years ago, there wasn't really, any contemporary indigenous technology for 3G or 4G. Then it turned out that there were players who were making various pieces of the puzzle. There were companies making the radio access networks, that's called, what goes on the towers, what you see when you drive around in the streets, on tower tops, the antennas, the electronics, and so on. And then there were 1 or 2 players who started doing what's called the core network, which you don't see, which actually is sitting behind all these towers, usually in the main capital of the state, or sometimes even for the whole country at a few places. And it turns out that CDOT is one of the it's a government-owned lab. They had developed 4G core network, but somehow all these pieces are not coming together, and that's one reason why there has not been an indigenous vendor for deployment. What has happened is in the BSNL procurement for 4G, the government has made an attempt to enable these multiple suppliers to come together as consortia and bid. Otherwise, in the bidding conditions itself, none of them will be able to bid because naturally, as an operator, they want a single vendor, single entity to take responsibility for the whole solution and so on. So it's a reasonable thing. So the new tender conditions have been changed to enable consortia to bid, with some lead company taking responsibility with sufficient financial power and muscles and financial capability and all of those things. So that, and then of course there's the other issue that when you procure such large quantities worth a lot of money, you obviously want proven equipment. So there's an issue of provenness, which is a chicken and egg problem. So anytime there's a new, indigenous vendor who wants to enter the market, so the tender conditions have also enabled this consortia to do a proof of concept or a trial before the tender is floated, and get themselves validated or approved as one of the potential bidders, even if they don't have a live deployment of certain number of lines in some other network. So some new conditions have been changed to enable the potential indigenous vendors to be able to break into this market. That's what is happening in the current BSNL procurement. And if this goes through properly, then once one or more, hopefully at least two such vendors develop, I think after that you will see private, even private operators, the other private companies running telecom services, all of them will also procure from Indian vendors if the offering is competitive and globally comparable. Yeah.
So, fine, indigenous 4G developed by the Center for Development of Telematics. They've done
they developed a part of it. Then the radio access network has been done by some other company. That's one consortium. There are other consortia who also bid. So,
okay. Yeah. So why was BSNL picked? It's a bit of a laggard in the telecom space, isn't it?
Well, it's not a question of picking BSNL. If a private operator was willing to go through this learning curve or this curve, so to speak, then it would have been fine. But I don't think many of them are willing to do that. I think what they look for is a proven product which they can roll out quickly. So BSNL, the government has, as the major owner of BSNL, or probably I don't know, I think they probably own the majority shares only, or maybe they own the full company. I don't remember the details, but the government has decided that it's important for the country to have indigenous network vendors, especially looking at the way the security situation is evolving in telecom. That if you don't find a way for indigenous vendors to break into this, the story will continue forever. So one way is for the government as a major procurer to change the conditions under which they will procure to enable competent quality suppliers to be able to enter this supply chain. So that is why BSNL has been picked, because though BSNL has other issues that are troubling it, but government has the ability to ensure that BSNL provides this kind of a platform for new indigenous vendors to break into the supply chain.
So the fact that BSNL uses a lot of Chinese equipment, that was not an issue.
Well, that's a separate issue. What I'm saying is the BSNL till this tender were also procuring. They didn't rule out indigenous vendors, but they wanted vendors who had proven certain number of lines somewhere in the world and proven technology and so on. And no indigenous vendor was able to meet those requirements. Okay, so they were also procuring all their equipment from foreign vendors, including Chinese vendors. And in fact, because of cost reasons, they go by L1 and so on. I think a lot of their equipment happened to be Chinese in the recent last 10-20 years. And of course, now the government has come out with some new procurement policy with regard to procuring from equipment from countries with land borders and so on. So it's possible that Chinese vendors cannot bid for BSNL now tenders, but that doesn't prevent other vendors from bidding. Except that even now they can bid, but the tender conditions have been changed in order to enable indigenous vendors also to participate.
So are we seeing the emergence of BSNL as some kind of a strategic instrument of the government in telecom?
Well, it's stated. I've read in the media that in the news report from that the government has, in their whole policy with regard to, what do they call it, as privatization or whatever the asset sales, that they are going to retain in certain sectors one public sector undertaking as a strategic decision. I believe telecom is also one of them. So it appears that the current, my understanding of the current thinking of the government is that BSNL will be retained as a PSU, and there is no planned attempt to privatize it. as a PSU because the government believes it is important for telecom to have a government-owned, government-controlled network as one of the networks. It appears to be.
So
I mean, that's my. I mean, I'm just going by what I've read in the media, just like you have.
So that also implies that BSNL's role could broaden in the years ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if you do that, obviously, you are, the way things are going, particularly with regard to network security, it may turn out that critical infrastructure that is dependent on the telecom network might tomorrow, for security reasons, if you have a well-functioning, properly designed and properly run network, which is secure, it may be that the critical infrastructure will run only on that network. It's possible. I mean, these are all possibilities. When I say critical infrastructure, I mean, systems that are used to control the electricity network or the traffic network or the water lines or whatever. All these are going to be now going to be controlled through internet, and you have to worry about attacks, denial of service, somebody bringing down the entire electricity network, and so on.
Mm-hmm. So would you say defense and other will come under BSNL at some
No,
point?
defense has always been anyway handled very differently. I'm still talking about non-civilian applications, which also require. I mean, you can't have the electricity network, electricity grid coming down, right? I mean, this is not defense, but still it impinges on national security. So defense anyway, I don't think. I mean, they have sometimes their own networks and so on. I mean, that is a separate. I don't think this necessarily has anything directly to do with defense. Though once there is such a network which has a higher level of security, for some applications, even defense might choose to use it. I mean, for certain things, that's a different issue. But
so getting back to the indigenous 4G, what else can you tell us about it? Is it up to international standards?
from
How
what I can make
compatible
out,
is it?
yeah, I'm only an observer. I'm not directly involved, but from what I can make out, at least whatever the consortium that has already commissioned their trial network through which this call was placed recently, this is a consortium led by TCS. I believe it's from what I've heard. I believe it is up to global standards and will probably expect it to meet all the requirements in terms of performance, in terms of scalability, in terms of ultimately being able to roll out a network with 50,000, 100,000 base stations and millions of subscribers. I believe it is in the same league. And if I look at the members of the consortia, I think all the relevant pieces of the puzzle, the experience that they need, the kind of equipment that's required, I believe everything is there. Now, of course, we have to see how they execute it and whether it actually, the proof of concept has to be successfully cleared, and then the tender has to be floated, and the tender has to be successfully won by somebody, one of these kinds of consortia, and then we'll have to see. But it looks promising. And that is a stepping stone for 5G. If you don't do this, you can't do 5G indigenous. You can't suddenly. Somehow, if your 4G network is not indigenous, it's very difficult to patch on an indigenous 5G network to the same network, because 4G and 5G sort of go hand in hand. The early deployment of 5G in all the networks in the next 2-3 years is not even, the core network is not even going to be changed. The core network is going to be the 4G network, and only the 5G base stations are going to be added on to the same network. This is called a non-standalone mode of deployment. Globally, all operators are starting with that. And therefore, if you don't have a functioning 4G network, it's unlikely you can have a 5G network. And, it's very unlikely that an operator will have 5G base stations from different vendor patched onto a network which has been supplied turnkey by a vendor already. It's very unlikely. So I think it's very important to get 4G indigenous if you want to have 5G indigenous.
So this criticism about reinventing the wheel, you wouldn't say it's quite valid?
Well, it's not reinventing the wheel. When you have multiple, when a new car vendor enters the Indian market, is he reinventing the car? He's not reinventing the car. He's just competing in the car business, right? So, I mean, that is not, the words are not right. But yes, I mean, should you compete? Should you have an Indian one or more Indian vendors because we are we are either the world's second or third largest procurer of, probably the second largest procurer of telecom equipment. Should we not be part of supply chains, not only in India but globally? I mean, should we just be net buy, not just net buyers, sole, I mean, only do buying? I don't know. I mean, I'm not clear. So I think there are many issues here. So reinventing the wheel is not the correct argument.
Now let's get on to 5G.
Yeah.
What's the update on the 5G rollout or
Well,
the
the update on
testing?
the 5G is that the 5G trials have been commenced, in the sense that the operators have been given the permission to do their 5G trials. They've been given the spectrum. I believe they're all rolling out their 5G networks. I believe in fact, some sort of early calls, just like the one you heard about the minister making on the indigenous 4G network. I believe Airtel also had an announcement recently about some things, Ericsson and Airtel, about something that has been done on a 5G network as part of the, they've not yet officially launched the trial, I think, but as early demo. I think they've done something. All the major operators are deploying 5G trials. As I said, I also read that Reliance Jio has said that they have their own indigenous 5G solution, which they are going to try. Airtel, I saw an announcement that they're going to do something with Tata's. It's probably the same consortium, ultimately. I don't know, in 5G. So they have said that they're going to do trials probably next year sometime. So they may be doing multiple trials. They may be doing trials with other vendors also. So, and BSNL, I presume, if this 4G things goes through properly, they will upgrade to 5G very quickly. And if 4G happens well with indigenous vendors, I don't see why they won't do it with indigenous vendors for 5G also.
So last question. There is a view that we should focus on 6G, Is this valid, and what is 6G, by the way?
No. If you look at the history of telecom now in the last 30 years, there is a new G every 10 years. This is the cycle now.
Yeah.
That is actually a planned cycle. Technology, wireless technology particularly has been improving, just like semiconductor technology. In fact, very often it rides on semiconductor technology, so it's improving. And every 10 years, you need very complicated standards to make all this work, because phones are being made by zillions of manufacturers. Every phone works with every network. When you switch it on, you're able to go from one country to another, one state to another. Everything just works. Obviously, all of this doesn't happen easily, right? So there's a huge amount of standardization that goes on. So you can't keep inventing new things every 2 years. Okay.
Yeah.
So there is a 10-year cycle that sort of naturally set in. And there's a process of approval of these global standards through ITU also. So there's a huge process involved in that. So there was 2G, 3G happened in the year 2000. It was the first planned such effort. 2G sort of was more of a effort by a consortium of companies, but 3G is a fairly large effort, global effort. And then 4G happened in 2010, 5G happened in 2020, 6G will happen in 2030. That's the plan.
Okay.
And it will incorporate new innovations and new ideas, new research that will come out in the next. That is going to be, innovations that are going to be made, inventions that are going to be made in the next 2-3 years. Usually, by the time about 3 or 4 years before the standard is rolled out, you have to sort of freeze, because you can't be inventing till the last minute. Usually, there will be a version upgrade also in between. There will be a 5G plus or 5G advanced that comes out around 2025, which will have some things that are better than 5G, but it'll all have to be very strictly backward compatible. You can't tell people that whatever you bought yesterday won't work. So they do that, and then the real major change, something that involves probably some amount of lack of backward compatibility, may happen with 6G. So what happens is, when you get a 5G phone today, you may get some services which you can't get on a 4G network. So you roam into a 4G network, it will work only with 4G capability. It won't work with 5G capability. So they'll do the same thing with 6G. So there will be 6G. And it's correct to say that if India wants to participate, not just manufacture equipment, as I said, not just be one more car vendor, but if you want to actually contribute to 6G, your own innovations and so on, which we also did for 5G in a limited way. Yes, you have to start working on 6G now, because in fact, many of the research institutions are doing that, because a lot of the new ideas in 6G are going to be frozen into the evolving standard over the next 4-5 years. By 2026 or 2027, it'll all be frozen, and then all the details will be worked out. All the I's will be dotted, T's will be crossed, and then the standard will come out. Okay, so that's.
So you would see India playing a role in 6G also.
Oh yeah, I think so. We are already there is an 8 institute consortium that's been formed and funded also by MIT, that is looking at 5G and beyond, and early 6G research over the next 3 years. I'm sure after that there'll be a full-fledged 6G research project, because that will be the right timing. So we have to participate, and companies should participate. I think for companies, in fact, globally, it's companies that take a lead role.
Yeah.
And companies, for Indian companies to participate, Indian companies must become larger in scale in this. And for that, so that's all linked back to the getting into the supply chain and this BSNL tender and private operators also then opting for indigenous tech vendors, and indigenous vendors having sufficient scale to be able to be a large enough player to be able to afford to participate in this kind of innovation and research cycle.
So going forward,
You can't just do one. You can't just do one of these things. You can't say, oh, I'm going to start on a clean slate and I'm going to do 6G, and I'm, by the way, I don't do anything else. I don't have any 5G. I don't have any 4G. That's not going to work. Right.
Good. So just to sum up, the trial of indigenous 4G technology is underway. We're also looking at 5G further down the road, and whether you have 4G or 5G, both are seamless. And in that sense, preparing for 4G also prepares you for 5G.
Absolutely.
And further down the road, you have 6G in everybody's sights. Dr. Ramamurthi, thank you very much for your insight. And glad to know that India is on track. Something seems to be working somewhere. Thank you very much.
Hopefully, we'll all keep our fingers crossed. Thank you.
Thank you. And for all of you out there watching us on Instagram, on social media, keep following us, subscribe to us on YouTube, keep sending us your comments and observations. Thank you.